As a therapist, I've seen people just struggling so much on the dating scene.
How do we get here?
People hide behind their computers so they're not afraid of rejecting someone. We're lonely because we don't feel seen. We don't make real human connection with people.
I don't think people know how to date for a long-term committed relationship.
You have a perception about what women are looking for, and women have a perception about what men are looking for, and I think that there is a gap between those things. Getting to know yourself and know those red flags so that you might see someone who has similar personality traits, but they don't have the same red flags as what you're familiar with.
Now I can see it. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it.
People don't want to go through that discomfort. This means something about who I am as a person. Part of it is that we're afraid to say what we really want, and so we don't speak up or we're not totally truthful.
How can the person tell apart whether something might serve them or not?
Yeah, that's a great question. One example of that is that if you grew up in a...
Sarah, first and foremost, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
No, thank you for being here. It's really exciting having you on. You are a therapist with 25 years of experience. You have you treat people in relationships, in and out, how to communicate better, and all of that. But you also are in the dating industry. You have your own dating company that we can talk about later. Having said that, what is happening in today's dating world? How do we get here?
That's a great question. As a therapist, I've seen people just struggling so much on the dating scene. And I think it's as a result of two things. One, I think during COVID, we got really disconnected and we got used to hiding behind our screens. And two, I think the way of dating has gone toward online dating, and that's the only way people know how to meet each other. And I've just found that that is not the most effective way of meeting people, and you don't exactly know what you're getting. And so I think people are really dissatisfied with that process.
Yeah, that one thing right there when it comes to post-COVID, I can definitely see that. I can see how not only that we get ourselves behind the screens, but also it prevents people, especially men, from feeling rejected or being rejected.
Oh, tell me more about that, about the male part of that.
Well, the male part of that, and this is somebody who last time I dated was 11 years ago, 2013. I ended up, my relationship ended last year, and I haven't dated ever since. But what I've heard, not only from people and friends that I know, when you swipe right, you don't have to approach a new person. You don't have to overcome that fear. And I don't think it's the fear of rejection, and probably you have a lot of patients. I don't know if they're mostly male or female, but that is a big step of especially post MeToo movement. You don't want to come across as some creeper, somebody who's trying to do something, even though the person might not feel that way. The girl might not feel that way. You as a guy, it's like, I'm anxious, I'm nervous, I don't want to give off that vibe and be embarrassed and be ashamed. In your experience, and once again, I don't know if you have had a lot of male patients, but how can people overcome that and just be okay with the fact that you don't need to necessarily swipe right, but you also need to have the approach as well?
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought that up. I see clients that are both male and female. And I also have a son who is single and he's an adult male. And he's brought up this exact same point with me, that he's a little bit introverted. And I've said, why don't you approach someone? And he said, I feel scared that they're going to perceive me as a creeper. And I said, what if you just say something benign like, hey, that's a great shirt, or something like that? And he said, no, my fear is that she's going to look at me and say, ooh, why are you talking to me? And I do think the Me Too movement, of course, it has a lot of validity behind it. And I also think that there's a part of it that's made men afraid at all. And I think it's probably made the men who were decent men to begin with more afraid. Whereas I don't know how much help it's given to the men who are already going to be creepers anyway.
I can relate to your son and to many men out there. Again, I haven't approached anybody in years, but one thing is when you have a deregulated nervous system, when you are full of anxiety, when just like all the alarms just go off and there's no reason, it's just our body trying to keep us safe, and it's just like it is hard to battle and to fight that urge of it's just the flight or fight response. But in this case, also even freeze. You just freeze in the moment. I rather not approach. I don't want to experience that. And that is causing a lot of frustration among men. It's causing also a lot of loneliness, because I don't know how familiar you are with dating apps. I'm not that much. I never used them. But I was searching some numbers, and Tinder in 2022 released some numbers saying that men swipe right like 60% of the time and women only 4.5%. So when you have that disbalance, right, it's just like, I understand why a lot of people struggle. It's just like upside down. In your experience, both as a therapist and in the dating industry, how much harm has dating apps done to society?
I've done a lot of research about dating apps. I also have never used them. I've been in a relationship since before dating apps existed. But I've done a lot of research about it, and I think they have harmed people. And I think the thing that you stated, I didn't know that statistic that you just quoted about men swiping right 60% of the time and women only 4.5%. That is a huge disparity. I think what happens, though, is people hide behind their computers either way. So they're not afraid of rejecting someone because they're not in person with them. And I think guys are probably not afraid of swiping right and trying because there's no real in-person rejection. I think what happened is our brains evolved to formulate relationships in 3D. So we see the whole person, we're picking up on their body language, we're seeing all these different things. And I think what's happened is we're reduced now to 2D with a screen, or 1D with just, writing. And I think it's never giving us the satisfaction that we want. And so we keep swiping, or we keep hoping that there's something better out there. So I don't want to say yes to this person because I've got 100 more people in line that might be better than this person. And I think that there's something harmful about that because it keeps us in this perpetual state of not really making a decision.
See, that's an interesting point. And to me, as somebody who, once again, last time I dated was 2013, was for almost 10 years in a relationship, it seems to me that nowadays, and I don't know whether this is true or not, this is just my perception, that a lot of people, especially the younger, like in their between early 20s to mid 30s, I don't think people know how to date for a long-term committed relationship. I'm not going to even say marriage, but I don't think that they know. I think that a lot of people, both genders, they either want somebody who is ready-made, who's tailored for them. They don't have to compromise at all. It's like perfectly fits to their life and their puzzle. Or they don't have the capacity to envision the kind of life they can build with somebody else, that it needs work, it needs all the things. And if you add that, the distraction of social media and the contradicting voices that people hear in the podcast or the places where it gives you the perception that you have abundance, right? That there are so many different options, then obviously I understand why you are looking for the perfect match. But that's a perception I have. What have you seen from people that you probably treat a lot of patients that are looking for love, that are looking to be in a relationship, but yet it's hard for them to find them?
Yeah, I think they are having a hard time. And it's interesting because the people that I see are people who are successful in every area of their lives. So their career's going well. They usually have their home life is good. Their family life is good. And the thing that they're missing is a romantic relationship. And they're confused about why they can't find it. I think that there are a couple of factors that you brought up. And I was curious to know, you said you have some single friends. Do you think that your single male friends are looking for long-term relationships?
Yes. So that is a very interesting point they're making, because the perception, I think, from most people, from most women are, and I think that's why I want to talk about this, right? Because we all live on reality. It's based on the stories we have told ourselves and the belief systems we have and the things we see on social media. And I think that a lot of women's perspective is men don't want to settle. Men want a casual date and all of that. And the perception for men is women only want highly successful, tall men, extremely handsome. And what you realize is like, I don't have any studies that back this up, but to me, it seems like 8 out of 10 women are targeting the top 1%, the top 10% of men. It's like, so 8 out of 10 will pursue the same guy. That is, if you want to maximize, if you really want to not settle, right? Because you feel that you deserve somebody who is tall, who's successful, who has lots of money, based on what you see your friends doing or you see on social media, then that person, that one guy, doesn't have, nothing for him. It's just like he doesn't have any reasons why to settle. If I'm being pursued, then what's the point, right? I don't need to be in a long-term committed relationship. But the problem is you leave out 9 guys out of 10 that, or maybe 8 guys out of 10 that really looking for that relationship, but they feel like they don't have the look or the resources or the status to be enough for those women. Now, I think it's a perception point of view. And yes, most of the guys, single guys I have, they're looking for it. But a lot of them are also introverted as well. So it makes it harder.
Yeah. I wonder if this is as divided along gender lines as you think it is. But your statistics do say something important about the guys swiping right way more often than women. But I hear these similar things from women as well.
Okay.
That they feel like maybe they don't measure up to the standards, that every guy wants someone who looks like a supermodel. And if they don't look like a supermodel, then they feel like they're not really in the running. And I would say that for women, they feel more like it's based on looks. They're not worried about if they're making enough money, because they don't perceive guys as being as interested in that. But they have to be tall or beautiful or striking looking in order to get guys to swipe right on them.
That is the main problem. I think it's like we all have these stories.
Yeah.
We all think it's like, well, women, and it's interesting because if you talk to any guy who's not highly successful, who's not like the top 10 or top 5%, if to any regular dude, they say, hey, first of all, beauty is on the eye of the beholder, right? So if I find somebody attractive, another person might not find her attractive.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really matter that much. I do feel that women think or feel that they need to be skinny, gorgeous, and all of that. And they blame a lot of men for what we're looking for. It's like, I don't know if that's necessarily accurate, because the model industry is led by women and gay men. Now, we men, we don't feel like, oh, you need to be skinny, or you need to be tall, or you need to be gorgeous. And I think I read an article very interesting recently that is called The Empathy Gap when it comes to dating. I don't know if you heard of this. It's just that we both sexes don't know what the other sex really wants.
I believe that is accurate. And just think about our conversation right now, that you have a perception about what women are looking for and women have a perception about what men are looking for. And I think that there is a gap between those things.
And besides that, which is clearly obvious, that we think we know what the other person is thinking or wanting, and we create our own conclusions based on that. Another point that this article was touching was the fact that, for instance, men think that it's awesome that women can have sex anytime, any day, anywhere they want, right? It's just, for women, and for women that is not true. for them that's horrible. For them, it's just I don't want that. I just want to be with one person. So a lot of men feel some sort of resentment towards women because they can have something that they don't get, they don't have. And I think women are not truly aware of how many men are not getting into any sexual relationship whatsoever, that are kind of outcasted or they are isolated, and that creates a lot of frustration and resentment and about that. I mean, a lot of men are resentful for that, but I think also women don't understand how scary it is for a guy to approach a girl. So not having empathy for the other gender, not having empathy for the other sex creates this I don't know how you would call it. This, I wouldn't say hate, but this battle or this war against each other, when in reality, what are we fighting for?
Yeah, when people really just want to be with each other. That's a really good point. And we're creating this false sense of a dichotomy that doesn't really need to be there because both people are struggling in their own way.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know, Sarah. I feel this is a fascinating topic for me because this is it's just in our DNA, it's in our nature, it's in our instincts, just to find somebody, be in communities, procreate, and it seems that a lot of men are flat out checking out of society overall because they feel a lot of pressure. They feel that they need to be up to these extremely high standards, whether that is true or not, whether that's accurate or not. And women, I do have some female friends, and I have friends who have single female friends who tell me, hey, I'm just giving up. I'm just giving up. I can't find anybody. And it's creating a lot of loneliness in society.
Yeah. Loneliness has become a huge epidemic. I wanted to go back and address something that you said about men have this standard that they have to live up to. And I know that women feel the same way. What I think this does is it sets us up to be inauthentic. Because if I go on a date and I think that the man I'm going to go on a date with has these high standards for me, then I'm going to try to be that person rather than just being myself. And I think that men do the same thing. If they think a woman wants someone who's highly successful or ultra masculine or something like that, I think both people go on the date and try to be what they think the other person wants them to be instead of just being themselves. And I think that sets us up for failure.
Absolutely. But see, part of me understands that, because if it's that hard, at least from a man's point of view, women can get first dates like almost all the time. Not all the time, but if the numbers that Tinder released last year about 2022 are accurate, then women get a lot of matches and they have the opportunity to go on dates. Mm-hmm. Men not as often because they only swipe right, let's say 4.5% of the time. But if you're a guy and say, it creates that scarcity mindset for men. It creates an abundance mindset for women, but it creates a scarcity mindset for men. For a lot of men, because if I swipe right, people say it's a numbers game. But if I swipe right like 20, 30, 50 times and I only got one or two, then I need to hold on to that as much as I can.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And creates that, authenticity that you talk about.
Yeah. And so do you think in that case that the guy would be trying really hard to be what the woman wants him to be?
I think there's a room for that, because I don't remember, I was watching a YouTube video probably last year. They were either interviewing the psychologist on a podcast or she was giving a TED Talk. I don't remember quite well, but she was talking about this study of 2,000 people that they gather between men and women. And they asked them, what would the other person need to have, or what would you need to see on the first date in order for you to go on a second date with a person?
Great question.
Excellent question, right? Because it gives the other person, it gives you clarity, exactly what you're looking for.
Yeah.
For the guys, there was like top 3 answers. Like, I need to be somewhat attracted to her. Mm-hmm. Meaning, she doesn't need to be attractive. I need to be somewhat attracted to her. She needs to have like a good sense of humor. Don't take herself too seriously. And number three, be kind, be respectful. You just treat people with respect. For women, though, they had this, and this person, this psychologist is a woman. She had like a long list of 100 different things, whether they had to have long hair or short hair or wearing a khakis or doing this or all these crazy things, right? And I think when you have an abundance mindset, you can feel that you can be pickier because you want the best of the best. But then now that's what's what the famous word now, the ick. It's like, okay, that's an ick, and that's, well, what are you trying to find then?
Yeah. Yeah, that goes back to what we were talking about earlier about fear of a better option. It's a new term called FOBO.
Okay.
That you don't want to say yes to this guy because he's perfect, except he doesn't have long hair, and I really wanted a guy with long hair, so I'm going to hold out to see if the next guy might be more perfect. And so we just keep going down the line and trying to find somebody that's more perfect. And I think it sets everybody up for failure.
If they know that, because again, I don't know if you consciously know, when we say you, I'm talking about women out there. If you consciously know that, or even if you don't, but you realize that whatever you have done hasn't worked, why is it so hard for people, in some cases, both men and women, to change and to adapt? Say, okay, let me try something else. Let me lower your standards feels like you're settling. Mm-hmm. But if you have unrealistic expectations, high standards, then you're never going to find that person.
Yeah. I don't necessarily think it's about lowering your standards. That's a term that I don't think people are going to buy into. But I do think it's about getting really clear about what you're actually looking for. Because the truth of the matter is, and I can say this as someone who's been in a relationship for 17 years, whether that person has long hair or not, or whether they wear khakis or not, that's not going to make you happy. And I think people have gotten convinced that they need all these things in order to be happy. So typically, one of the assignments that I give people as a therapist, if they're looking for a partner, is I say, make a list of the qualities of your ideal partner. And like you said, with this talk you were watching, they might list 100 things. And then I say, imagine if you woke up tomorrow with this person. This is now your partner, and you're living together. Your life is great. Imagine how you're going to feel. And they pause and they imagine that feeling. And then I say, throw away that list. Because whatever's on that list isn't the important thing. It's that feeling that you get with this person that's important. And that's what you're looking for on a date.
Can people feel that on a first date, though? Because first date are usually awkward. First date are extremely, both are anxious. They don't know exactly what to expect. First date is usually, I think, a vibe check. And if you as a woman, for guys, I think we care less about this. But if you're a woman, if you don't feel the spark right away, then you probably are telling yourself, and I'm just, again, this is an assumption. I'm not saying that this is accurate. Then you might feel, oh, I didn't have a connection with this guy. But how can you find or feel a connection after half an hour, a couple of hours, for the first time ever?
Yeah. I think what you have to imagine is, does this person have the potential for me to have that feeling with them? You're, of course, not going to feel that on the first date. But it's interesting. There's a couples researcher named John Gottman, and he's kind of the guru of couples therapy in the US. And he did a study that said you usually know within a very short period of time if this is your person or not. That within minutes of meeting someone, you usually have some sense of whether it's your person. I think that can be a little bit dangerous because you don't want to make a snap judgment, but in your gut, I think you know if this person has potential. I think what happens, though, is we don't tune into our gut because we're looking too much at the external.
When you mentioned that, I thought about how sometimes people who haven't healed past traumas, people who have their own insecurities, people who have low self-esteem or been in relationships that don't serve them, they tend to go to what is familiar, what feels familiar.
Yeah.
So even if you feel it on your gut, is that gut feeling is familiarity? It's like, okay, I'm used to this. Even though I'm not seeing the red flags, it feels like home. How can a person, especially somebody who hasn't had great relationships or good relationships and tends to go to what's familiar, what it feels like home, how can the person tell apart whether something might serve them or not?
Yeah, that's a great question. One example of that is that if you grew up in a household where your parent was an alcoholic, you gravitate toward people who have that issue because it's familiar to you. And obviously, you don't want to end up in a relationship with someone who has a substance abuse problem. But because that personality type is so familiar to you, you're drawn to it. I think your point about post-therapy, part of it is getting in therapy and knowing yourself. I'm obviously biased about that because I am a therapist and also because therapy changed my life as a client. But I do think getting to know yourself and know those red flags so that you might see someone who has similar personality traits, but they don't have the same red flags as what you're familiar with.
Yeah, I guess it would take a lot of not only self-work, but create enough self-awareness and understanding your patterns and your behaviors. But I feel that now, for me, yes, it has never been that hard. I'm lucky enough to always that in me a lot of I reflect a lot. But I feel that a lot of people nowadays, with all the distractions, they don't have enough idle time. They don't have enough time to think and to just be bored and understand themselves. How can if that's the case, whether with therapy or not, because 1 hour a week is not going to do enough if you're not doing the work yourself outside therapy. Yes. And I've seen people going to therapy for 3-4 years and have zero results, but that's not on the therapist, that's on them. What can people do to start changing those patterns and start being more, not only creating more self-awareness, but being curious enough to start understanding themselves, even if that is highly uncomfortable?
Yeah, the highly uncomfortable part is what makes people stop, because you get in therapy and you crack this door open and you're like, oh, I don't want to crack that open. Let me shut it back. It never shuts back quite the same way because people don't want to go through that discomfort. But it's like anything else. If you wanted to get fit and you started working out at the gym, you're going to be sore and it's going to be hard and you're going to push yourself through some workouts. But at the end, you're going to be so happy with the result. And I think that therapy is the same way, that it's uncomfortable. You've got to push yourself through some difficult times and the result is worth it because you end up being a more self-aware person and you end up being happier and picking better partners, I think, as well.
Yeah, I'm all for therapy. I've been, for some reason, I guess, my parents started sending me to therapy when I was like 7. I think because I had ADHD. So to me, therapy has always been normal. I know that now it's becoming less of taboo for men. But for me, it's just like, hey, if I'm struggling and I understand where the struggle comes from, I'm still going to go to therapy. To me, it's kind of pointless to try to fix it myself. And I wish more men could think that way. It would definitely reduce the suicide rates that we see nowadays. Just keep increasing. We tend to isolate ourselves a lot. I'm one of those as a man. Whenever I'm struggling, whenever I'm depressed and like heavily depressed, I isolate. I don't interact with anybody, which makes it worse, because with that isolation comes loneliness then creates the whole thing and leads to bad outcomes, as we have seen in the last few years. So yeah, it's uncomfortable, but I guess if people want to live like a happier, better life, they have to go through that pain at the beginning.
Yeah. I think people have an idea that therapy is for someone who has a mental illness. And rather than thinking of it like this is an objective person that only has your best interest at heart. So if you talk to your best friend, they have a stake in what you decide. Like if you ask your best friend, should I move across the country? Well, they're going to say no because they don't want you to move away. But if you ask your therapist, the therapist is going to ask you questions and help you come up with the answer that's best for you. It's also a place that you get fully seen for an hour at a time, that somebody's just paying attention to you. And I think, kind of coming back to your ideas about loneliness, we're lonely because we don't feel seen. We don't make real human connection with people. And I think therapy is a chance to get that real human connection with someone.
That's a good point you're making there. I was talking, I don't remember who I was talking to, but one of my friends mentioned about loneliness and being lonely, and one of the girls mentioned, well, you guys feel that you're lonely because you guys don't have girlfriends or whatnot. And what he said was, it's not that I'm looking for a girlfriend. It's not that having a girlfriend will make me feel less lonely. It's that I don't have meaningful connections, right? I can have my guy friends, but we as men, we don't talk about our problems among each other. And there was this talk I attended to years ago, and this woman came to the stage and said, for the women in the audience, raise your hand if you have talked to anybody about you or your problems in the last week. It could be your mom, it could be your sister, it could be your girlfriend, anybody. Probably, I don't know, 80,
Everybody raised their hands.
90%. She asked the same thing to the guys, and probably 8 of them raised their hand. Only 8. And that is just, we live in a society where, or in a culture worldwide, where men cannot be vulnerable, men cannot speak up, men. And it's funny because I could have a bunch of guy friends who feel the same way, and yet none of us are going to talk about that between each other, and that is going to be hard to overcome for men. So I don't know, you as a therapist, if you have any kind of advice or any kind of how men can start being more open to other people without feeling that they're going to be seen as weak or vulnerable or less of a man, I guess.
Yeah. Yep. I think that what happens is you have to try it, and then you see the payoff, and then it's an incentive to keep doing it more. It's funny because this is part of, you mentioned at the beginning that I've been a therapist for 25 years, and I just recently started a company called GetDateable, and it's an alternative to online dating because I've seen people having so much struggle with online dating. And a part of my vision for creating this was having a community. That's basically exactly what you're saying. So not just being able to meet potential dating partners, but to have a community of people that you can reach out to and ask questions to and go on outings with and do fun things with. So you're having a reason to connect with people, and then it sort of naturally evolves from there. So it alleviates the loneliness that comes from not having a support system, and also potentially the loneliness that comes from not having a partner. But I think the support system is as valuable, if not more valuable, than the part about finding a partner.
Totally. And I think because men, I read, I don't remember which website it was, but roughly 60 to 70% of men relied on their spouse as their emotional support. Women, only 30% of them. So clearly, when after a guy breaks up, or after a breakup, or after divorce, men completely crumble that because they don't have that support system. And building that support system outside your relationship might be key to preventing depression, suicide, loneliness. And yes, I think that you're right there. Just creating that environment is more important, or might have a better impact in your life than finding a partner. Finding a partner is still very important, but if you don't have the support system or somebody that you can have that as your emotional support, then you're kind of screwed.
Yeah, it's really true. So if I have one person, let's say my partner is the only person I go to when I have a problem, what happens when that person's not available? Or what if the problem I'm having is about my partner? Then I got nobody. But if I have my partner, and then I have my best friend, and then I have my second best friend, if I have a list that sets me up for success because I got more options, and it also sets my partner up for success because they're not my only support system.
Yep, that's my case. I used to rely on my ex-wife a lot, emotional support. When that person was no longer there, it was tough. It was really, really, really hard. But I was going to therapy, so that kind of compensated to some extent. But yeah, just to me, we know what we need to do, and yet we don't do it based on, I don't know, whatever fears, insecurities we have. And creating connections outside a relationship, like meaningful, especially for men, is hard, but it's something that we need to be working on more often. And even if you have like your guy best friend, you need to be willing to talk about things that are not very comfortable.
Yes, because I think if what you're talking about is sports or, headlines in the news or something like that, that's great, but it's not getting at what's really going on with you. And that's the real connection piece that you're talking about. It's super important.
Yes. But one thing I will say though is I feel I'm a very empathetic person. I've gone through a lot of stuff in my life, and if somebody comes to me, I can not only listen to them, but maybe give them advice or just have empathy or just hold a space for them. But one thing I've realized, at least with the 2 or 3 guy friends I've had in the last 12, 13 years, is when the conversation gets slightly uncomfortable, if I share something with them, even if it's just a very surface level, they don't know how to react. They have no clue what to do. They feel extremely uncomfortable. And I have like a sort of funny story. That happened to me last year when I was going through the middle of my divorce. One of the guys I used to hang out with, he no longer lives in Austin, but he picks me up at my place and he points out that my going to be ex-wife was moving to a different state and all of that kind of thing, because he found out on Facebook. So I explained to him. I gave him a little of the details. When we got to the bar, we're sitting down, we're having drinks, and he asked me, "How are you feeling?" So I said, "Okay, the guy cares." So I started telling him. The first 10, 15 seconds, I started telling, "Hey, it's been rough. The last few months have been just like getting a blow here, a blow there." He stopped me at 10, 15 seconds mark and said, "I know, you have been sick for the last 3 days. How you feel?"
Oh my gosh.
And I didn't take it personally, because in my head, inside, I was just laughing. Like, I've been in those moments before where another person and a man feels so uncomfortable about something and they don't know what to do. And it to me was fine. But he was very curious. Like, I understand why some men don't open themselves, because when you do, other ones don't even know how to react to it.
Yep. They're awkward about it. And you're such a good communicator, and you're an evolved guy who's been in therapy and you have really good self-awareness. So I can imagine that you probably run up against that more often than your friends do.
A few friends, weirdly, we never talk over the phone ever, right? Whether with my female friends or guy friends. But if somebody if somebody calls me, I know that there is some issue about this, and they like to approach me just because I can't be. One of the mistakes that you can make as a friend, especially if somebody's approaching you with a relationship issue, is to be, in my mind, be 100% on your friend's side, and just like, screw her or just screw him. And it's like, I like to place the devil's advocate. I like to say, okay, I'm very curious, like, why is this person behaving the way that he or she's behaving? So I'll give them my perspective based on what they're telling me. Now, it's only one side story. I don't know the other details, but I can only think, okay, maybe she's doing this because of this, or maybe he's doing this because of that. Look at from an objectively point of view, rather than, I don't screw them.
Yeah. That's most of the time not what people actually want. They don't want you to just take their side. And I think it's also helpful to ask a question. So instead of saying, well, she's probably doing that because, to say, why do you think she's doing that? She's someone you were attracted to, so she obviously has good qualities. What do you think's making her behave like this right now? And get them thinking about it.
Yeah, I'm going to start using that one. Because I might know the answer based on what they're telling me, but then the point is that they need to realize for themselves. It's different when somebody tells you something rather when you realize, oh, now I can see it. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it.
Yep. And if they come to their own conclusion, then they're more likely to realize it
and take action.
Yeah.
Sure. Going back to online dating, right? That created that, and people say if you match the pill in the 60s plus online dating in the early 2010s, it created this hookup culture, casual dating, and all of that. How is this harming men and women in general? My understanding is that women get more emotionally bonded to men after having sex because of the oxytocin levels. And I wonder if a lot of women having a casual sex or one night stands or just the typical hookup, what's the psychological damage on women when they engage in these activities because they feel that's what society expects from them, or they feel empowered, whether that, by the way, I'm not judging at all, but it seems like a lot of women after having this casual sex and not getting any connection with, or feeling that the other person is not feeling the same as they do, they feel bad and dreadful and some shame.
So I think that the shame is based in cultural expectations, that if you go back many years, it was fine for men to sleep around and it was not okay. So guys were revered if they had a lot of sexual partners, and women were considered sluts if they had a lot of sexual partners. And I think we're breaking out of that, but I think there's still some lingering part that makes women feel guilty. I also think that there's something biological in that if you think about the vulnerability of sex for women, I don't think this is necessarily what you were referring to earlier, but I did think of it when you were talking, that women can have sex whenever they want to, right? That for men, I don't know how graphic we're allowed to get on this podcast.
Yeah, go for it. Hey, we're good.
For men, if you don't get an erection, you're not going to have sex, basically. Let me just say this, you are not going to have penetrative sex with a female if you're not turned on. For women, they can have sex if they're not turned on. That's not necessarily a good thing. So women are expected to have sex even if they don't feel like it, whereas men cannot have sex if they don't feel like it. And I think that there are good and bad things on both sides of this, that for a man, I mean, we call it sexual performance for a reason, because it is a performance. And there's this expectation that you're going to have, you're going to perform in a certain way. And if you're standing in front of me, I can see if you're turned on. If a woman's standing in front of me, I can't see if she's turned on, right? And so there are just these different expectations. But the vulnerability for women is women are the receptive partner. So something's being inserted into their bodies. Like, that's a very vulnerable thing. Whereas the man is the one being, not being the insertive partner. So that is much less vulnerable. And so I think that women afterward have experienced a vulnerability that men have not necessarily experienced. And then you go into the cultural expectations and the chemical reactions that happen in our bodies that, those things I think they have sort of eroded the quality of relationships that both sexes are having.
Yeah, but I think that the shame is still out. In fact, I think it might even is coming back, I think even stronger in a way. And again, all about a perception. The things we see on social media, those are the things that get likes, that get clicks, that get views, and they go viral. But there is a lot of shaming, whether that's justifiable or not. I'm not the one who to judge that. But when women claim having, high body count, like 20, 30, 40, whatever the case may be, for men, it's just like, well, I don't want to be with somebody who is that easy, or somebody who's been sleeping around, who doesn't have any standards. So I do think that even though for a moment it decreased the amount of shame, I think nowadays we are seeing like a rapid increase, and this battle between men and women, and I don't know, it feels like women want to be empowered, feels like if men can have lots of sex with a lot of people and not being ashamed, we want the same. I get it, but we are not the same, right? I understand you want equality. I understand you want to not being judged, right? I get it. But we need to face reality. It's just like if a man doesn't want to be somebody who has been sleeping around with 20, 30, 40 guys, you need to accept that. And it's just like you don't want to be with a guy who's playing video games and is smoking weed all the time. So,
but I want to challenge you about this, because the reason that guys don't want to quote unquote be with someone who's slept with 20 or 30 or 40 guys is because we have a cultural norm that women are supposed to be virgins and guys are supposed to be able to sleep around. And so what needs to change is the guy's expectation, I believe. Because it's this idea that it's okay if I've slept with 20 women, but I don't want to be with a woman who slept with 20 guys. That's a double standard that's not okay. And that's rooted in a belief system that came from, long time ago. So it's like, why is that okay for you to do that, but it's not okay for me to do that?
See, I'm laughing because I have a good friend of mine whose wife, she and I go back and forth with this, right? I don't have a dog in a fight at all. Just to me, I like to play both sides and just argue and all of that. But then I told her, it's like, okay, it is well known that women are the gatekeepers of sex, right? Men will want probably at all times, anytime. A woman will tell you whether you're going to have it or not. It's like, unless you go onto raping and things like that. But in general, if a woman says no, you're not going to have any. And the man has to put the work to get you to say yes, right? And so I guess because the man have to put the work and women don't in general, it's not that if women have to approach men and convince them to have sex with them for whatever reason, women don't do that. I think that's why men see it in a different way, and it's a very funny thing that I always use against these friends of mine's wife. They say, well, as they say, a key who opens many locks is a master key. A lock who can be opened by any key is worthless, right? So I make jokes. I'm not trying to shame people, but what I'm trying to say is like, I get it. I understand that it shouldn't have the same standards. Oh, I mean that is a double standard. But how can you change the men's mindset in a large group when it seems 80% of them, 90% of them think the same way? Feels like it's hard.
I think it's a slow change. And I mean, this could go into a whole other topic, but it's like saying, women have historically been paid way less for the exact same job that men do. And it's like, well, I should make, $50 an hour for this job, but you should only make 30. And it's like, no, that's ridiculous. So it's the same idea. I should be able to sleep with 20 women, but you should not be able to do that. So it's just looking at, we shouldn't base that decision based on the sex of the person, whether they're male or female. Interestingly, though, I see a lot of couples in my therapy practice, and I would say it is close to 50-50, the amount of couples who, so let me back up. Mixed drive is one of the main reasons that couples come to therapy to talk about sexual issues, is one person wants more sex than the other. I would say about 50% of the time, it's the man who wants more sex, and the other 50% of the time, it's the woman who wants more sex. So we have this idea that, men are always trying to get sex from their wives, but in reality, it's often the women who are saying he never wants to have sex. He wants to play video games and smoke weed, or he can't get it up, or he can't keep it up. And so I think that that's a myth because we're not really talking about it.
Yes, I would agree with that. I think that from my point of view, it would feel like 80 to 90% of men have more drive than women. But
I bet that's because if you have friends that have low sex drive, or if they have sexual performance issues, they're not talking about it.
Oh, 100%.
So they're only being like, they're the ones who are talking about it are the ones who are saying, yeah, my wife never wants to have sex. Not the ones who are saying, man, my wife wants sex all the time and I just don't want to do it. Those guys aren't going to be talking about it.
And I think, I don't know if women can be, I think it's number one, it would be a communication issue, right? It's tough to have those hard conversations. It's hard to address such a sensitive issue, even between couples, right? It's like, as a man, how I'm going to tell my wife, hey, I want more sex, or even as a woman, say how I'm going to tell my, my husband or my boyfriend that I want more. It's such a delicate thing, because we put so much value in that, and it has value, but it would hurt people's self-esteem, ego, feeling they're not enough. How can couples address this in a healthy way without hurting the other person?
Yeah. I think being really direct and just speaking up about what you want, and then asking your partner what they want. Part of it is that we're afraid to say what we really want, and so we don't speak up, or we're not totally truthful. So, for example, if I want more sex, rather than just asking for it, then I'm going to pout if I don't get it. Well, that doesn't make any sense. It's not helpful.
Yeah, I speaking of which, it's funny because I have a female friend who, a few years ago, when she was married, she did mention to me that she was having that issue. Well, actually, she didn't tell me. She told her girlfriend, and that was next to me, and I was in the middle of the conversation, but then I was there. So she released this information, being aware that I was there. I was just like, I'm not gonna say anything, because I don't wanna put the guy in a bad spot. But I remember talking to her a few weeks later, say, by the way, I was there when you said this. She said, yeah, it's fine. Maybe the guy's always tired, he's always working, it's always like, I don't know. I mean, I was trying to vouch for the guy, even though I never met him.
Yeah.
But it's always trying to find, it's like, hey, but I don't think that she ever addressed that. And as a woman, I can understand if I was a woman, right? And women are very, I wouldn't say sensitive, but then for them, they need it to feel wanted. They need to feel appreciated. They need to feel sexy. They need more so than men. Men, it can be big, small, fat, skinny, or whatever. They don't feel that women might be attracted to them physically. Women feel that the beauty is the only thing that they have going for them. So I understand how it can affect them psychologically more.
Yeah.
And when a man doesn't want to have sex with you, then you feel ugly, you feel fatty, and you feel unattractive.
Yeah. You feel like something's wrong with you, for sure. I see that a lot. When really it has probably nothing to do with you. Yeah. The other thing that is, a lot of things are not divided along gender lines, but this is something that I see almost exclusively divided along gender lines, is that men feel like personally less than if they don't feel sexual, and if they don't make enough money. Like, those are two things that it's like, this means something about who I am as a person. Whereas women, if women don't feel sexual, they're like, yeah, I just don't feel sexual right now. It's not a big deal. Or if women don't make enough money, it's more like a logistical problem. Like, oh, what can I do to make more money? It doesn't mean something about who I am as a human. And so if a guy's having problems in that area, it can really pack a big punch to his self-esteem.
Well, nowadays, it's just, it feels, but there's an obsession on me being man. I can understand with a lot of content you see on social media, like 2 big performances, like how long it can last and how big he has it, right? It's just like those 2 drivers. Like, if I don't, and I can blame a lot of porn for this, right? It's just like you have this, and then I don't understand what women's perception, women's ideas of how big the guy should have it, or just how long it should last, because it gets a lot in our head that even if we don't have it, as a porn star, or if we don't last, like 20 minutes, 30 minutes, half an hour, or whatever, then we are going to disappoint the other person. It's going to hurt our ego, and also not only our ego, but then the person wouldn't want to have sex with us because we disappoint that standard.
Yep. This is so interesting how it just ties back to what we were saying earlier, that we get these ideas from the media. And what I would say is, if guys are watching porn and thinking that that's what women want, they are sadly mistaken, that most of the time what you see in porn is not at all what actually works for women. That porn is created for men, not women usually.
Now, the question is, and I don't know if you can answer this, but because this is how we think, men, what do women think? What is for them? Because some of them say size matters, some of them say size, some of them say 5 to 8 minutes is fine, and some of them say 20 minutes, half an hour.
Yep.
And whatever. And when we have these kind of things, like, okay, we don't know as a man where we stand when it comes to performance. What do women expect from a sexual encounter? Let's say it's not casual, it's not a hookup, it's in a regular early relationship, for instance.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that's a great question. And I think that if you think about it in a bell curve, that there are always going to be outliers of women who want sex to last for an hour versus women who want to get it over with as fast as possible. But I would say the vast majority of women do not want sex that lasts, or penetrative sex that lasts for 30 minutes. And most women, I mean, I would say if a guy has like a teeny tiny like micro penis, or if a guy has a huge penis, neither of those is really what women want. And so most guys probably fall somewhere in between those two extremes. And so if you're in between those two extremes, you're probably fine. And if you're someone who can't last sexually as long as your partner wants you to last, there are lots of other things that you can do instead that would satisfy your partner.
Like a lot of foreplay before, and then it's just like...
Yeah, exactly. And just, both people being mindful of making sure that their partner is having a sexually satisfying experience.
Yeah, I think that openness, because I've heard this from women, it's just like from a frustrating point of view. It's like, man, you guys never ask us what we want. It's like, well, because if we never even ask for directions, so we feel that we should already know. This is our belief system, our stores. Like, we should be, if we need to ask, that means we are ignorant. That means that we don't have the expertise. We don't know. Mm-hmm. But then once you are in a relationship for a long period of time, you realize, well, each one has like a very particular way that they like things. So you need to ask without feeling that asking will make you less.
Absolutely. And your direction metaphor is like a really good one too, because it's like, wouldn't it be better to just ask for directions than to drive around for an hour getting lost? Same thing with sex. Like, wouldn't it be better to just find out what your partner wants? And also to give direction and let your partner know what you want. It sets you both up for success.
And why it's so uncomfortable then? Like, it's not that you're in the middle of thinking, by the way, give me a list of what you want. It's like, hey, okay, number one, check. It's like, it's how can people have the conversation without turning the whole thing off?
Yeah. Well, part of it is that you should talk about it in situations that are not necessarily sexual situations. Like, maybe this is something you talk about over dinner or before you get into the bedroom, that you start talking about these things. The other thing is, if you're paying attention to your partner's body language, then you're going to know what feels good and what doesn't. So you pay attention to how they're breathing or how they're moving, or if they're pulling themselves away from you or moving into you. All of those things you learn just from paying attention.
Yeah, we rarely pay attention anyway. It's just like, see, I feel, and this is with almost anything in life. It's like the solutions are very, very simple, but they're just hard to implement because they're uncomfortable, because we're not used to them. And communication is just a massive, massive issue. That is one thing that I learned in my relationship, in my marriage afterwards. Looking back, there was, and this is not on the sexual area, but then in general, one of the main reasons why they end up falling apart, it came down to small things that were not communicated over a long period of time. And then you think about it and you look and you're just like, it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal in a vacuum, just usually pointless. When you let it accumulate, it could be for your patients when one has like high sex drive and the other one is not. You might increase his or her sexual drive by doing a couple of things that will make that person feel special or make myself feel desire, but you're not aware of those. Yeah,
that's true. And I think to that point, often women feel connected before they feel sexual. So I want to be connected with you before I move to that next step. And men have sex and then they feel connected. And so it's this trick that nature played on us that we're sort of in opposite camps that way. But just knowing that if your partner feels more connected to you, they're going to be more likely to feel sexual toward you.
Yeah, I've told a couple of my guy friends over the years, over the last couple of years after I learned some, because I'm very fascinated by human psychology, how people react, what they do. It's like, but not from books, but just by observing people. And I told one of my friends, like, dude, I bet, and I know, but I'm just betting that if you just throw a few compliments here and there, just words of affirmation, and just make it like, if that person feels appreciated, if that person feels that you love her, if that person feels that you want her, that sexual drive will come by itself almost. It's just like, and you're not tricking her, and she's not tricking herself. It's just like how she feels in a relationship. And it's not that she's trying to give you something because you're complimenting her. It's just like things psychologically just happens by itself.
Yep, I agree. And going back to, if you're paying attention, that you never want to say something inauthentic. You don't want to tell someone she's beautiful if you don't think she's beautiful. But why wouldn't you say it out loud if you do think that? Yeah. And just also, things that you hear women saying about guys being helpful around the house or doing kind gestures, that it's not an exchange. Like, you do this and then I'll have sex with you. But it's like, when you do these kind things, then I feel more connected to you, and then I'm going to feel more sexual toward you.
Yeah, I guess at some point, and you probably see it a lot, especially couples that have been together for a long period of time, is just, we take the other person for granted. It's just like, it starts being a relationship, and then it's almost like a roommate type of relationship. Just like, we're without feeling that appreciated. So Sarah, I've been enjoying the conversation quite a lot, and I feel that we touch a lot of points that people could really benefit from. But where can people find you if they want to either work with you as a therapist or be on your new business, GetDateable.com?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So in my therapy practice, my website is just my name. It's sarahkyle.com. GetDateable is getdateable.com. And the word dateable is the word date and able. So sometimes people don't put that E in the middle of the word, and they end up it's on someone else's website. Yeah, and for GetDateable, if you're single and if you want to have a community of really cool single people, you want to meet other folks and do some fun activities, that's sort of what we're about. We're about creating that community of really cool people who support each other and give you a chance to not only meet people that are in the program, but you meet friends of people that are in the program, and your coaches will know people that they can also introduce you to. So it's sort of an exponential way of meeting other people.
Yeah, very interesting. You can get both, as we mentioned earlier, a support system, friends, and also could have a partner as well through GetDateable.
Yep. We've also, part of what we do that's a little bit different is we provide coaching for you that might help you recognize why you're having trouble finding a partner. We also have an assessment that's free on our website. You can take that and figure out, it's a dateability assessment. You can figure out if there are things that you might need to shore up that would help you as you're on the apps and as you're looking for a partner.
Perfect. Well, Sarah, once again, thank you so much for being a podcast. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Thanks so much, Daniel.